Welcome to episode 91 of the Loane Hockey Podcast, where today we're going to be talking about the regular season starting tomorrow in the NHL and full slate of games tomorrow and a handful of pretty good matchups. And it's going to be interesting to see how some of these games go down. So, starting, there's the St. Louis Blues versus the Seattle Kraken in Seattle. And so it'll be an interesting matchup, especially St. Louis. They got a younger crop of players, and obviously Broberg and Holloway coming in, but at the same time, they signed some free agents and signed some players who really add speed to their wings and speed to their forward group. And again, having a little bit of young talent, but also at the same time, still the crop of veterans that they have there already with Jordan Binnington, Colton Parayko. You have Nick Leddy on the back end. You have Brandon Saad up front. You could argue Robert Thomas is more of a veteran now in the league, and Jordan Kyrou is getting towards that mark. And a lot of the talented players up front. Robert Thomas is a really good center. Jordan Kyrou is a really good winger. And there's a good mix with St. Louis and what they can accomplish this year. They had a good season last year. They're going to look to build off it this year. Seattle's an interesting team because they're coming off some big free agent signings, Chandler Stevenson, Brandon Montour, and it's going to be interesting to see which one and which way this goes because Seattle's at home, but at the same time, St. Louis can, again, they can bring speed to their game and to their forecheck, and it'll be a competitive matchup. But with Seattle, like I said, the big free agent signings, Chandler Stevenson's shown really well in preseason with his playmaking thus far. I don't necessarily know if he's going to get back to 60 point scoring form and if he can do that consistently, but at the same time, he's still going to provide top six scoring for them regardless. And he's going to be a player who can produce. And Seattle's an interesting team because outside of the free agent additions, they have a lot of different players that they can bring into their mold. And it'll be interesting to see if Shane Wright will be able to make the team full time season and how that situation plays out. And they have some other players who have been around the team for a little while now, ever since they've joined the league, and they've been consistent and they've been standouts on the team. And as for another matchup, which will be probably the best of the night, it will be Boston against Florida. Boston, they look like they're going to have a really good team this year, and adding Elias Lindholm in free agency adds to their first line center role. So it replaces Patrice Bergeron. They had Pavel Zacha and they had Charlie Coyle last year, but they needed a true first line center. Now they get Lindholm, and that works out really well in their favor. And then you add Nikita Zadorov on the back end, a little questionable in a sense, but he'll provide some physicality, some grit, some tenacity on the back end, and provide a shutdown role. And he's played really well defensively in preseason thus far. He's taken some penalties like he's usually inclined to. At the same time, he stood out on the defensive side of the play and being able to shut plays down in that sense. And he's a standout defender when it comes to that, being able to use his longer reach and size and his frame. But outside of that, Boston has a really good team, and they have obviously a lot of their star players still around. And at the same time, their free agent additions just shore up their team a little bit more and add to their depth a little bit more, which will really help because, like I said, they need a first line center and they've needed one for quite some time now, ever since Bergeron left the league. So Elias Lindholm, he'll be a really good fit. And he had a little bit of inconsistency after getting traded to Vancouver last year, but Boston was one of those teams that was really in on him at the trade deadline, trying to acquire him. And fortunately enough for them, he made it to free agency, so that way they didn't have to give up any actual assets to get him. They just had to use money to sign him. But and then with Florida defending champs, obviously, and at the same time, they're going to be an exciting team to watch once again. And obviously losing some key players off that championship team, but at the same time, there's some players coming in who could potentially fill a void. Adam Boqvist is going to be an interesting one if he's able to play consistently in Florida and if he's able to play consistent hockey inside their top four in an offensive role. And he could be a player that could blossom in Florida with their up-tempo Ds and how they incorporate Ds into their system, into the offensive zone and everything along those lines. And then Florida at the same time, really fun to watch offensively, obviously, like the Barkov, Chuck. You have some younger players in that mix as well, and some other players who could very well make the team terms of younger players. So they're going to be a fun team to watch once again this year. And then last matchup of the night, Blackhawks versus Utah Hockey Club. Chicago is going to be an interesting one. I don't necessarily see them having a hot start to the season. I see them being a little bit slower out of the gate because they still have some inconsistencies in their game that they need to shore up and fix. But adding Teuvo Teravainen, adding Tyler Bertuzzi, adding up Alec Martinez, adding TJ Brody, Pat Maroon, Craig Smith, some of these other veterans, and being able to add them into a younger group with Connor Bedard there already has really allowed them to play a little bit better. You have Taylor Hall back potentially for a full year if you can stay healthy. So that's another really, really big component to their top six. And you have some other players who can play different positions, some younger guys, and some younger players who could make the team and play consistently, like Frank Nazar and Kevin Korchinski. Going to be an interesting one to see if he sticks the full season in Chicago or not, and how that situation is going to play out with Korchinski. I'd imagine he's going to get a handful of time in the AHL this year since he's last year he wasn't able to get sent down to the AHL and he didn't need to go back to junior because he already dominated junior. So it was smart to have him in the NHL last year. And at the same time, this year it'll be interesting to see if he does get a lot more AHL time to really develop and round out his game even more. So with Korchinski, that'll be an interesting case study. And they've had some really good rookies that have showed well in preseason. Ethan Del Mastro, you have Louis Crevier that's stood out, and then you have some younger defensemen, but at the same time, some of these forwards like Frank Nazar is a big one, could really blossom if he's given an offensive role consistently. He's not necessarily relied upon defensively as much, but in an offensive role with his speed and his play off the rush, you can get a potentially a very dynamic player. So he's really intriguing. And then with Utah, recently named Clayton Keller as their captain, and Utah is another interesting team who looks to take a step forward this year and adding Mikhail Sergachev in the offseason, their younger crop of players that they have and that have stood out in training camp and throughout preseason games, and the veteran mold that they have up front and on the back end. They've really rounded out their top four defensively, and that's really been a big component to them. They have Carl Vamilka in that, they have Connor Ingram in that. Two goalies who aren't necessarily prone to NHL starting ability, but at the same time, it's smart to have and smart to see if Vimmelka could really blossom as a starter in the league, and same with Ingram. And both have showed potential in years prior to be NHL goalies and be NHL goalies consistently. It's just more a matter of if they're able to blossom as that starting goaltender. So with Utah, they've rounded out their top four. They have Mikhail Sergachev, they have John Marino, they have Sean Durzi, who's already been there. They have Yuto Valimaki, an intriguing option, intriguing sets of pairings when you're talking about Utah, and even Ian Cole, who is a little bit more rugged, but can play a top four role when needed as well. You have a lot more ability inside that top four to be able to create not only offense, but be able to shut plays down defensively, be consistent defensively. A lot of the analytics support a lot of those defensemen, like the analytics support Dursey, Shergashev, Valimaki, and Marino. So that's really rare when you have a top four essentially built around analytics and analytically inclined defensemen. So those guys are going to be really intriguing to watch this year. And there's a good balance and mix to both of these pairings inside their top four because you can use Sergachev with Marino. Sergachev can be offensive, Marino can be defensive. And then you can use Balamaki with Dursey, or you can interchange that options and those options a little bit more. So a lot of different options, and it should be exciting to see how the 2024-25 NHL regular season goes this year.